Broadcasting from Titletown, USA. Here's Joe Simon.
Welcome, everybody. We are live and in color from Titletown, USA. I am Joe Simon. And in a minute, we'll have our special guest, Ryan Long, coming in from National Gold Consultants. We're talking gold, silver, pre 1933 U.S. coins today. Here we are. Well, let's get into the opening comments today as we look at what's going on here today. And I think the best place to sort of start is a historical ground zero. So here's what's going on. And, you know, we live in a very volatile, very fluid market right now. So everything we're talking about here is in motion and fluid. But this is what we're finding as we talk to our subject matter experts. And we bring in a really smart guy like Ryan Long in just a minute. But let's talk about supply and demand, the central bank reserve, strength of the US dollar, and of course, political and economic uncertainty. We'll address those real quick to kind of set the stage, set the table as we get into this today. So supply and demand, like any commodity, basic supply and demand play a central role in pricing when demand outpaces supply, such as during times of economic fear or rising in industrial use, prices naturally rise. Conversely, excess supply can drag down prices. This is especially relevant for silver, which we see substantial industrial demand in addition to investment interest. So what about the central banks? We're going to circle back to that one in particular when we bring Ryan in just a minute, but central banks look at this and say gold still plays a key role for balance sheets of central banks around the world. As these institutions shift away from paper currency to diversity their holdings, we typically see an upward push in gold prices. This trend has accelerated in recent years as nations hedge against dollar volatility and rising inflation costs. What about inflation? What about the strength of the US dollar? Gold and dollar have a historically inverse relationship. When the dollar weakens, either due to inflation, interest rate shifts, or macroeconomic uncertainties, gold becomes more attractive as an inflation hedge. Investors move capital into gold as a way to preserve purchasing power. And lastly, probably the most timely topic is political and economic uncertainty. Wherever global tensions spike, so does investor interest in precious metals. Concerns about new tariffs set by President Trump have rattled global markets and led to sharp volatility in the stock market, amongst other headlines in the news this very hour, causing many investors to turn towards gold and silver for stability. So with all of that said, let's welcome in our friend, one of our business partners, subject matter expert, Ryan Long. Hey, Ryan.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
We have a lot of stuff going on in the news today that affects everything that's happening in markets. You know, it's sometimes you want to keep one eye on it by the hour as long as the markets are open. Which brings us to this interesting conversation. It's as old as the Great Pyramids, practically. We're talking precious metals, gold, silver, and kind of one of the best kept secrets out there is pre-1933 coins. So we have about 25 minutes to unpack this. So we're going to kind of methodically step through it. But I guess I want to give you 1 minute to really talk about the headlines as you see it from the last couple of days. What are you seeing out there, Ryan?
Well, we only have 25 minutes, Joe. No, just kidding. I tell you what, with every hour that goes by, every news stream that you're on is a brand new headline. And the brand new headlines, I call them the surrounding economic storms that are upon us right now. So how do we, Joe, how do we unpack this? How do we decipher what's news from noise or noise from news? And I look at it this way. I mean, we've had so much uncertainty ever since 2020 with the financial markets and with COVID, and now we're sprinkling in wars left and right. And I tell you what, when you have economic uncertainties, if you talk to any sort of individual, and you listening to this might resonate this with yourself, with economic certainties, you kind of scratch your head with what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to protect myself? What's the best course of action? And Joe, you mentioned gold and silver has been around since probably before the pyramids. Well, there's a reason why this isn't anything new under the sun. This is the idea and the concept of money. Money is a store of value. Gold and silver is a store of value, and especially when you have uncertainty with the things like the Irans and the Russias right now, an important store of value couldn't be more important now.
Very interesting. So let's talk some fundamentals. Someone sitting back. This particular few minutes today isn't for the advanced person, someone sitting back going, I know all of this, yawn, I'm bored. This is for a beginner to intermediate person that has been reading the headlines, sort of studying from time to time with some very interesting articles on precious metals and what we're here to talk about today. No offense to you advanced thinkers. You might be bored with some of the blocking and tackling that we need to set this up today, but we're going to cover that. Just a warning. But let's talk about gold. Let's talk about silver. Just in my recent studies on silver, because silver had a phenomenal week, I believe it was about a week ago. So all of a sudden, all the attention is, what about silver? Gold looks prettier than silver, maybe. But let's talk about some of the basics behind each of those and why really both sort of complement each other. It
when it comes to gold, the first money known to mankind, again, store of value, right? It is the shiny thing that all the news outlets do talk about. It's the most expensive thing, and it is your most store of value. But silver is that forgotten store of value that people tend to overmiss. And when you look at silver, they play a more of a tandem with gold, and gold typically is that initial front riser when we have economic uncertainty. When we have inflation and the lack thereof of accountability to print currency, that's when gold tends to rise first and silver tends to significantly rise afterwards. Joe, just a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, we had that gold to silver ratio, meaning how many ounces of silver it takes to make 1 ounce of gold in price. And that was well over 100 to 1. When the historical normalcy, even in the United States Constitution, has that ratio pegged at 16. Well, we've been saying this for a while, that silver has a ton of catch up to do. And we're starting to see that now. Silver has broken out, and it'll continue to do so in our humble opinion. But in one short week, we saw the gold to silver ratio have and hit 105, and it's all the way down to 91 as we record this today.
Very interesting. I don't want to overshadow gold. We'll talk about that more in detail today. But one of the just fascinating things, and this is kind of what I like about this entire conversation, is how much you can talk about these kind of things. So here's some interesting. Silver has an influence. It's an industrial metal. It affects electronics, batteries, medical devices, and solar panels.
Mm-hmm. One thing that's not included in that, Joe, and I hate to say it, but it's the reality we're in right now. Silver is used in missiles. It's a booming industry in war. And that's part of the reason we're starting to see some of this. There needed to be a catalyst moment at some point, but in order to manufacture a missile and power a missile, there is a significant amount of silver involved as well.
That's a timely statement. And so I guess just absorbing some of this information for a minute, Ryan, tell us from your perspective as the gold dealer that we work through, big buyer of this, dealing with multi-millions in some cases of all of these types of precious metals. What's the difference between buying a mutual fund that says it's a metals fund, precious metals, even a gold fund? So that's a mutual fund. And buying physical. Here, got some from you the other day. So these are silver dollars. Yeah. And so what's the difference getting something like this versus a mutual fund where you get your statements? They're both honest, but what's the big difference?
Well, bear with me as I share with you a terrible illustration. The terrible illustration is this. Well, Joe, I happen to be a resident of Florida, and a lot of cruises go out of Florida, right? Well, let's just say I happen to board the cruise ship called the Titanic, and my wife and I go on there together knowing the history of this vessel. Well, the Titanic, the crew member, when we get on, shakes our hand and says, "Hey, Ryan, I've got two options for you, knowing the history of this vessel and what it's going to do. The first option is the actual life preserver you can put around your neck right now and have for that very reason, for times of calamity and peril. Or I can give you a certificate saying you own said life preserver. Which one would you take?" Right? Pretty rhetorical when it comes to that. Now, your listeners, Joe, and your clients and your realm of influence that you have, in this time that we're in right now, no one is searching for a piece of paper saying you own a stock of gold and silver. And here's why. It's the old proverb of possession is 9/10 of the law, and if you don't hold it, then who actually owns it? The mutual fund market, Joe, it's great for very short term. If you find yourselves maybe a day trader and you're going to trade Jerome Powell with the Fed rates and the minutes, or you're going to trade, hey, are we going to bomb Iran or not? That's one thing. But when we're dealing with the physical market of the stuff you can get your hands on right here, Joe, there's only a finite amount of this product that's available, known to mankind. So when we have calamity that's out there, everybody flocks towards physical safe haven assets that you can't make any more of. And the paper market is just that. It's only worth what somebody's willing to value it at. And on top of that, those paper markets, Joe, if you read the prospectuses, and I'm not going to bore you all, it's 200 to 300 pages long. They are stating that the gold and silver that is in those funds are not only leveraged, but they're leased, and sometimes leased outward to 200 to 300 times to 1, meaning there's really very little gold and silver that back any of those funds. So physical versus paper, Joe, there isn't a comparison.
Interesting, great insight. Hey, I want to sort of pivot back a little bit to one of my opening comments, and we were talking about the central banks. And there's something going on as of July 1st this year, 2025, called Basel III. And here's my take on it, and please share a little more about this. But what we're seeing is a historical movement over the last year, in particular, record purchase by these central banks of physical gold. What's going on?
Well, I use the banks almost as the canary in the coal mine situation, Joe. What do they know that we don't? In 2024, because we haven't seen the statistics here for 2025 yet, but in 2024 alone, the global central banks purchased more physical gold and silver in 1 year than they have the last combined 54 years. So in 1 year, there was a combined net purchase of more than the combined 54 years. What do they know? What do they see what's coming down the pike? And I can tell you our little pea-brain mentality of not being in the influencing sphere of the central banks, but we can speculate as to what's coming down the pike. Gold and silver is a store of value, a store of money. All of the other dollar-based or other-based currencies that are fiat means they're backed by nothing. Okay, so when you have a central bank exposure to large derivative markets, credit markets, you name it, that are blowing up right now, they're backing their reserves with physical gold and silver. So on top of that, Joe, you want to talk about a timely thing as we are today, less than 2 weeks away from July 1st. the Basel III, so Basel comes from Basel, Switzerland. There was a Basel 1, there was a Basel 2, and here we are as a Basel 3. Those are just different rules and regulations that the powers that be globally, worldwide, have set for the global banking standards. So what's going into effect July 1 are these central banks. In order to become a compliant and registered central bank, they have to have, I think it's roughly between a 16 to an 18% holdings of all of their assets into physical gold and silver. Never in history has this ever been a thing. This is something that if you look at the global money that's out there, or the currency that's out there, there is a significant amount that's out there and exposed. 16 to 18%. This only goes into effect July 1, that they have to be compliant over the next 3 years after that, Joe. So what you're seeing now are just central banks essentially pre-buying in order to become compliant, and they have 3 years to fully comply before it all goes into effect. This is the pregame before the actual game starts, Joe, and we've seen a 50% increase in gold in the last 12 months.
Let's go to one of our graphics called Market Dynamics and the prices of what we've been seeing with gold and silver, and take a look at that. There it is. Can you see that, Ryan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so this is real gold prices from 1960 for all you youngsters going, we're old. Okay, but I just want to get a big snapshot of what I would call modern day history through 2024. So let's sort of spy on what took place as the yellow ticker gold. This is just looking at gold from 60 through last year. And you can see it starts at 60. There's something called the Bretton Woods collapse in 1971. What doesn't show there is when Nixon steps in and changed how our dollar was valued, which we'll visit that a little more today. There's a 1973 oil crisis, then oil prices surge around 79. Moving forward to the 2000s, things were pretty boring between 80 and the 2000s. They were heading south. But then we see the 2008 financial crisis. More people will remember that. And look at what starts to happen. As the market is turning south, gold starts heading north, physical gold. And then it reaches about 2011, 12. There's a spike. Then it takes a dip. Then a little up and down. But here's one everyone will remember. Look what happens. This is probably early to mid 2020. And everybody uses, that was probably COVID, before COVID, after COVID. It's become a marker in our life now. Well, it's also in living color when we talk about what the markets did. So this is what gold did. What do we see there? It spikes. Then it takes a dip. And then it starts to head north again. That brings us up to the end of 2024. So let's talk for a moment, Ryan, about those, I was going to say moments, those years, now 5 years, 2020 to almost mid 2025. Is there anything you haven't mentioned so far in our conversation about the history of gold and what we've just lived through? Everybody on this has been around long enough to remember 2020, real time.
Well, if I'm to give that chart, Joe, some actual fairness, it comes down to the phrase currency debasement or currency devaluation. So that whole chart can be summed up with that. What it shows, if you were to actually rewind, I know you showed from essentially 1970 to where we are today. If you were to rewind a little bit, all you'd be seeing is as a flat line. Gold and silver barely moved until we hit 1971. Well, the importance of 71 was when President Nixon came up and said, we're going to temporarily suspend the United States gold standard. So what does that mean? Well, prior to 71, the government, fiat, right. Prior to 71, the government had to spend its balances, its purchases, it's all of these budgets, like a debit card. Okay.
Right.
You could only spend.
That's a great example.
They switched it in 71 and said, no longer do we have to have the gold and silver backing. Let's use a credit card instead. So what you've seen, again, prior to 1970, it was a flat line. 1971 came and you saw this large dynamic shift upward, and there's going to be some pullbacks. There's going to be some ups and downs. If we showed to where we are today, Joe, that graph would have been off the chart. It would have been off your screen. And all the difference here between 2020 and 2025 is look at everything out there. Our dollar-based deficit as a government has doubled. Every purchasing of goods and services has doubled. Does that mean your goods and services are better, or does that mean your dollar just buys that much less? So the whole idea of what physical gold and silver does is it preserves and protects your purchasing power. And that's all this. This is nothing new under the sun. If you change the currency from dollar, Joe, to Zimbabwe, or call it the Weimar Republic, when a fiat currency unravels, all of their charts look very similar to what you just showed right there. I'm not calling for our dollar to go away. I'm just calling, hey, gold is going to do what it's supposed to do to keep up with your purchasing power, and our purchasing power happens to be utilized in U.S. dollar.
Fascinating. I think the term fiat gets your attention. One of the word pictures you created early on, I think you called it a debit card, but I really think it's more of a credit card. So, hey, all this stuff is coming. So the world respects our credit worthiness, so to speak, and that's getting weaker by the day. And so we're really spending money that we really don't have. And the old system was saying, hey, you got gold, it's valued at this much, and this is what the dollar's worth. Well, that's now pulled out of the equation. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. People like you and I aren't going to solve that problem, but there's ways in which we can try to diversify and be on the flip side of this coin. When things get a little dicey, the market goes south for some time. That's just keeping that thought very simple. I want to go to, let's take a look at some history, Christian, our producer, if we can look at that. Here's the history of the gold standard in America. So this goes way back. So the last one we looked at was 1960, but this takes us, for all you history buffs, this becomes very fascinating. For somebody that hates history, you might not find this fascinating at all. But I think it's really important, again, as we try to find a foundation to stand on as to why consider this conversation. It starts in 1750, 1776. 1792, I think that's when Thomas Jefferson was involved, and I believe he passed that act. We have an 1834 Concierge Act, and it sort of bumps. But so we're watching these things, but look at the time scale there. 1750, 1800, 1850, 1900. So now things get a little interesting. There's the pure gold standard. This is bringing us up to what we were just talking about when President Nixon got involved. 1933. Let's stop there. Ryan, tell us what comes to your mind when I say 1933.
Well, I've got two things that come to my mind. First thing is President Roosevelt confiscating gold and silver. And
what?
We all remember, I know, it was poof, it's gone. I guess none of us are probably have been around for that in this day and age now. But if y'all remember, that was during our Great Depression. Well, now in 2025, when we have depressions, recessions, they just print our dollar to oblivion and creates more inflation, which then helps us dig our way out of a problem and to kick the can down the road for our kids and grandkids. Well, Roosevelt did no different. He confiscated gold, gave everybody face value. So in this case, this is a silver dollar. I would have gotten a $1 note for this, payable from the U.S. Treasury, and I would have had to give them my silver. Okay, here you go. What they did a year later was they essentially doubled the price of gold and caused modern day or older day inflation and caused our dollar to have a very large devaluation of our purchasing power. So nothing's new under the sun. Right. And, I remember reading about the historical days of the Roman Colosseums. Well, when Rome was starting to fall, it was free for the Roman citizen to enter the gladiator Colosseums, but they had
I love this story.
They had to hand them their gold coin, and they cut a little planket off of their gold coin. The government collected said planket.
It's a sliver.
The little sliver, but so your coin is looking like a smaller version of a stop sign over and over again, and it's still spent the same. But what the Roman Empire did is then they made more coins. So I mean, inflation and currency debasement is nothing new. It just continues to repeat history over and over again. But that's where we are here now, Joe. Now we don't have any gold and silver we have to do it for. We can just go into default by printing by abbreviation.
Well, we have about 3 minutes left, so let's call this our power 3 minutes here. If I've been listening and I'm concerned about a lot of things, the number one fear that people say they have about their retirement is outliving their assets. That's a 73%. I think Allianz does their annual consumer survey that's got a lot of traction behind it. I think they've been doing that for at least 10 years. So that's into the 70th percentile. More than 2/3 of Americans are concerned about that one issue. So I guess one of my fastball questions to you is this gold, silver, precious, or a pre-1933 coins, is this an investment? Or is it a collectible?
Third word, we look at it as wealth insurance. Okay. Some people decide, Joe, to look at it as an investment, right? And they go, well, my gold and silver's rising in value. Hey, that's great. Well, I would flip the coin on them, say, is your gold and silver rising in value, or does your dollar just buy that much less, right? So for those that are in retirement, you need to have the appropriate amount of allocation or a percentage of one's wealth in order enough to make a difference. If we continue the printing press and you're on fixed dollar-based income, well, what are you going to do 3 years from now when it costs double the dollars to live the same? And that's where the gold and silver comes into, Joe. But collectible standpoint, the government views these coins as currency. So the fast little blip of that, they're private, they're non-reported. It's like having cash under your mattress, and it preserves your purchasing power. You can't lose.
So if someone wants to get involved with this more, how we work is Ryan and I are a team. Knowing where you stand with your overall assets is a first start. The rule of thumb here is 10 to 20% of those assets should really consider something like this. And it's a conversation that has to take place on a case-by-case basis. So it's a learning process. It's a step-by-step process. But I can tell you, we are living in times where it isn't, I have never seen it better than to become a student of this. It's some fun. So think about becoming a student first, but then also think about what that knowledge can do for you in your house. I'm going to give you my email so we can continue this conversation, and that's jsimon@davinciinsurance.com. Send your confidential information and questions, and we'll work it out, and eventually maybe even get on a nice call like this where it's just the three of us and we work out things for you. Ryan, any final thoughts?
No, Joe, this couldn't be more of a timely thing. The economic storms are upon us. Flip the news on and it changes by the hour. I'd like to be early to the party than to be late. So it's a very timely thing for everyone here to reach out to Joe. That's the only way to get through to my wholesale organization. But Joe, you're fantastic. You've always been a great resource for everyone. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. A busy guy. You can imagine what his life is like. And he's here with us today. And this is the kind of resource we can access. Ready to go, ready to tee it up for you and what you're...
You've been listening to the Joe Simon Podcast. Big ideas with powerful stories and real-time solutions. Business succession planning, executive benefits, employee benefits, tax beneficial savings, and more. Remember, information discussed here today is dated and not specific to your situation. Always seek personal counsel from qualified advisors. For more about Joe Simon, go to DaVinciInsurance.com. Joe Simon is a licensed insurance agent in the state of Wisconsin. Licensed to advise on accident and health, life insurance, disability insurance and annuities, as well as qualified long-term care insurance. Make sure to visit the DaVinciInsurance.com archives for more of our podcasts.
Now we're